Hi.
Hello,
Hello.
everyone. Welcome to Universal Recovery. Hi, Saf. How are you today?
I'm good, TJ. How you doing, buddy? You're looking sharp as
Um,
always.
oh well, thank you. I have to dress up for you and for our audience. This is my one time I want to get all dressed up for a live show. So I'm TJ Woodward. I'm here with Saf Buxy, of course. Welcome to
There we
Universal
go.
Recovery. And today, Saf and I always meet beforehand in the green room and talk about what is emerging for us as a conversation. And we thought it would be really great to talk about the different aspects to addiction and recovery based on the Indian proverb that says we're like a house with four rooms: physical, intellectual, emotional, and spiritual. And that's a big part of conscious recovery. And, I notice, Saf, in our culture, and maybe this has always been true, but
Hmm.
there tends to be a perspective that it's either this or it's that. And what you and I love to explore is what if it's this and that, right? So
Yes.
there
Yes.
is not one size fits all to what creates addiction. And there's not one size fits all about how someone can move into recovery. And I know I'm really comfortable in the emotional and spiritual rooms, but I'm wondering if you could kick us off. I know you were talking about the biology, and I'm assuming you're going to say that lives more in the physical room, or at least it makes sense that it does to me. So I'm wondering if you can kick off the conversation with that.
Yeah, of course, TJ. Thank you for that. Welcome, guys. Welcome to another episode of Universal Recovery. I mean, look, people with addiction lose control
Mm,
over their actions. Um, they crave and they seek out drink and drugs and other substances, no matter what the cost is. Even when there's a risk of so many consequences that we always talk about, friendships, relationships, hurting family, with the criminal justice system, losing jobs, financial. There's so many consequences. But what is it about addiction that makes people behave in such destructive ways, and why is it so hard to quit? Now, we were the scientists out there that I read recently were working to learn more about the biology of addiction, and they're showing that addiction is a long-lasting and complex brain disease. And I think when you come into people who've come into the 12-step fellowships, and I think that is what the 12-step program always talks about as addiction being an illness, and it's something that you'll always have. And we're not discounting that in any way, but we are, as TJ said, it's something that we want to add on to that as well. Um, and there's current treatments that can help people control their addictions as well. But even for those who have successfully quit, there's always a risk of addiction returning. And obviously, we know that as relapse. So I think the question we've got to ask ourselves, TJ, and the audience as well, is it a brain disease model? Is it an illness? Is it like mental health? I mean, I've been to a 12-step room, and they said to me, they've compared addiction to cancer.
mm.
They've compared addiction to heart condition. I was interested to see what your thoughts are. I can understand that the brain does change when you are indulging in drink or drugs or substances or whatever, or even when you're gambling or shopping, with the dopamine rush and everything. I understand that. But is it a lifelong illness? Are you always going to be an addict? That's the question.
Yeah, and there's not one answer to that, right? Because I do really understand, and my experience has shown me that there are different aspects to addiction. And so we could say, yes, it's a brain disease, and it can be a whole lot more than that. And as you said, what we're experiencing right now is there are a lot of breakthroughs in brain science and recognition that we actually do change the brain. So it's kind of like a chicken or egg conversation, right? I think there
Yeah.
has been an assumption that the brain is defective in some way or diseased in some way, and that creates addiction. And that may quite well be true. And also, we're also knowing now, too, that the addiction itself and the repetitive outward seeking is also creating a new groove in the brain. And so that could happen chemically, right? The more I use a substance, I can change my brain. For me, what I'm more interested in what we're seeing with neuroplasticity and the new brain science is that we actually create new grooves in our brain or through not only repetitive behavior, but through consciousness and through conscious awareness, what I'm holding to be true about myself. Saf, my conversation. If I believe I'm broken, I see brokenness everywhere in the world. And to me, that is a root cause of addiction, because we realize now that our thoughts, our emotions, and even our spiritual essence is actually affecting our physical self. And more people are waking up to this. And to me, that's really what we mean by integrative or holistic care or holistic recovery. Is we're not saying there is not physical aspect, but we're going to look at all four of those rooms and we're going to do it in a more integrated way.
Yeah, I mean, the common misperception, and I'm calling it misperception, I'm saying it respectfully, is that addiction is a choice, or it's a moral problem, and all you have to do is just stop. I mean, for me, that can be nothing further from the truth. But the brain does actually change with addiction, and it takes a good deal of work in some cases to get it back to a normal state. The more drugs or alcohol you've taken, the more disruptive it is to the brain. That's just common sense, right? That happens. There's things in the brain that happen, the neurotransmitters and everything else that goes with it goes all loopy, and the dopamine rush and everything goes up, and then your tolerance levels go high. But and if you look at the flip side, a healthy brain rewards healthy behaviors, like exercising, eating, or bonding with loved ones. Now,
Yes.
that's what I've just said there is exactly what I believe it is. If you have a drugs or alcohol or any behavior addiction that affects the brain in that way, it's going to affect it in that way, right? If you have a healthy brain and it's easier to bond with something else, and that brain will bond with connection and people and everything else. So the question is, the brain is affected in any type of addiction, because I think I don't want to call it addiction anymore. I want to call it bonding, connection, which is what bonding, connection, togetherness. Okay, so if we take the word addiction out of the equation and call it bonding or connection, we're either bonding with drink or drugs, which affects the brain, or we're bonding with family and relationships, which also affects the brain. So it is a brain disease.
Yeah, and I I want to be clear. I'm certainly not a brain scientist, so I don't want to speak to all the different brain science. Except what I do want to say is I can bring in the conversation about the emotion and the spirituality piece of it, because what we're realizing more and more is that our traumatic experiences, especially what you're saying, Saf, through connection or having connection severed, right? What we call attachment wounds. We know now that affects the brain. And I think that brain science is really in an interesting exploration about all of this. And it's my experience that we actually can change that over time. And, and obviously we're seeing that now. Science is showing us that and studying that more and more, the relationship between our emotions, our thoughts, and for me, the word I would use is spiritual, but our consciousness, the energy, the frequency that we're tuned into, we realize that that's actually affecting the brain. And it's very, very exciting, because I think it is important. And what you're saying is, looking back, let's say before Alcoholics Anonymous came along, it was considered a moral deficiency. Right. So AA comes along and says, what if it's a disease? And what if people have lost their choice or their ability to choose? And so it's not really morality. It was also viewed as, people were put in mental institutions. And of course, there are mental aspects to addiction, but it's not the whole answer. Right. So when AA came in 1935 and said, what if it's a disease, or it is a disease, then the conversation shifted from morality to disease. Now I think we're evolving into the next layer of conversation, which is not only with addiction, but all the medical world is looking at what if diseases aren't as solid as we once believed. In other words, what if we can actually change our mind and our body with our thoughts, with our behaviors, with the energy or the frequency that we're holding? there's some exciting stuff coming with quantum mechanics and looking at the observer. So it's, again, it's yes and I actually, maybe this will be a little controversial, but I don't think it serves someone in recovery to say we have no choice. Right now, I know that with 12-step, say you're powerless over alcohol, and I understand that. But unfortunately, what happens is people say things like, well, I just have a disease. I have no power over it. It's incurable. So I just have to, accept that I have this lifelong disease. And what I want to say is, I'm not saying that's untrue. What I'm saying is, yes, and we're not powerless over everything, including the thoughts we hold, including how we work with our emotions, including our spiritual practice. There's a lot that we can do to affect change physically, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. So yes, we can say it's a disease and that I'm powerless over my addiction, especially in early recovery. But I think it's important to also say we can start to take our power back and affect changes in our lives. So maybe we don't have a chronic lifelong illness that can never be cured. Maybe we can actually start to heal those underlying aspects that drove the addiction.
I've got a few messages, TJ, from the other platforms. So I'm going to read them. Firstly, I want to say a big shout out to Tanya. How you doing? She's my partner from Columbus, Ohio. So lovely to have you join us as always. I speak to her every day. She says correct neuroplasticity. She also continues to say there are clinical trials or studies, and I know she's in the medical profession, so that prove that feelings, thoughts, and our bodies are all linked, etc. Yes, agreed. And I think she's coming from a cellular level. She's talking from a cellular level there. Kimberly, hi, on the other platform, saying be illuminated, recharge neurons in your brain, and being illuminated to a new higher level. Thanks, guys. Thanks. Look, keep it all coming. Now, I know people who do brain imaging, TJ, and there's been studies of people addicted to drugs or alcohol, and they've shown that there's a decreased activity in the frontal cortex. So I'm no way that way inclined in terms of neuroscience, but all I know is that when the frontal cortex isn't working properly, people can't make the decisions to stop taking the drug, even if they realize the price of taking that drink or drug may be extremely high, and they may lose everything, whether it's the custody of their children, whether it's their health, whether it's their home, whether they're going to be, these are studies, university studies, and I don't know if you know, but I know this because I studied a master's in addiction psychology, and there's a Dr. Nora Volkow. Have you heard of her?
No.
She's quite influential, and she's very much into the brain disease model. She's the director of NIH, National Institute of Drug Abuse, and she says that no matter what it is, there's this decreased activity in the frontal cortex that when it isn't working properly, people can't make the decision to stop taking drugs. Now, if that is true, if that is the case, and we're from the school of thought that we must look at the deep root cause of the problem, the unresolved trauma, the connection, all that. How can we in conscious recovery look at that if at that moment in time the prefrontal cortex is disrupted?
Well, I think there are two things. One is what we already kind of spoke to, which is we're not sure if we came in that way or that came through a traumatic experience or that came through early childhood experience. I'm going to, go out on a limb and say it's most likely both, right? Or it could be either. Let's put it that way. I think the fundamental question, though, the piece that is more useful, because I do think sometimes we spend a whole lot of time trying to figure something out. And of course, in the medical world, they absolutely want to study the root causes of it from a physical standpoint so that we can, find some new ways to help people. And coming into the understanding, like we already talked, that our thoughts, our emotions, and the frequency that we're holding actually can affect the body, including the brain. And There's a lot of, evidence to support this now. And I think we're on just the tip of the iceberg of understanding this. Then we can start to recognize that we want to, as we've already said, look at all 4 of these rooms, not just one, right? So if someone comes in, they're a brain scientist, that is wonderful. And let's do all the work in that room and then also look at the spiritual aspects, right? And so, even the Western medical model set aside addiction is recognizing the relationship, for example, between a meditation or a mindfulness practice and the effect that has on the brain. So we're starting to recognize that it's not just the brain creates the behavior, or the brain creates the addiction, or the brain creates whatever other disease. It's also that we can start to heal in the other rooms, and that then affects the brain. And then we, I think, are at an exciting point in the evolution of our awareness where we can start to recognize that we can affect our physicality. Dr. Joe Dispenza, perfect example. He's someone who studies that and has done some profound research on how spirituality, mindfulness, meditation, reconnecting with our true nature actually has an effect on the body. So again, it's not either or, it's both and. And that's why I love there are so many different people exploring addiction and recovery. And we're in a time of some exciting breakthroughs in our field and in our awareness around this.
So I think what we're trying to say is that don't disregard anything and try and work as a collective when it comes to addiction. And if you are working with a neuroscientist, and then we've got the mental health, what came first, chicken or the egg, and we'll come to that in a minute. But Elizabeth, hi Beth, how you doing? I'm trying to get a message up. She puts an important point. She goes, I agree with this. However, I would question if this would work for everyone. For instance, someone with CPTSD has complex, I believe, post-traumatic stress disorder and or established serious mental health problems. Just my thoughts. It's a really good question. And again, I think TJ's more or less answered that. I think everything will work if everything is in place, like an MDT kind of thing, like a multidisciplinary team in place. So, for example, myself and TJ, or TJ in particular, who's bringing the conscious recovery, his model, his modality, his philosophy, his creation into the mix. Then you've got a bit of 12-step if you want to use a bit of that. You've got a bit of neuroscience, you've got a bit of counseling, a bit of psychotherapy, you've got a bit of you've got scientists involved. Whatever the situation is and whatever works, whatever needs to be there, I think working as a collective, and I say that all the time, not just in addiction, in everything, working together, I think we've got more chance of improving. This is not about competing. This is about collaboration. This is about getting it sorted.
Right. And even someone, with complex PTSD, we recognize that there are multiple aspects to that, right? And we identify any kind of mental health issue with behavior, right? So we're looking at the symptoms. As a matter of fact, if you look at the DSM, which is how we look at what we call a mental illness, I would call that a mental health issue, right? It's a cluster of symptoms. And yes, I'm quite sure there are organic aspects to it, but that's not the whole story, right? So to answer what she's saying about would it work for everyone, I think there are aspects of it that can work for absolutely anyone. I have worked with people who have extreme PTSD, and if we don't look at all the different rooms, we might miss some opportunities. So I am in no way saying that someone who has complex PTSD can just meditate and they can heal that, and that's the only thing they need to do. But that, in addition to the other work they're doing, is something that can create a more holistic and integrative approach. And I have seen remarkable things because, PTSD they are symptoms that come from obviously a traumatic experience. So then we would start to ask the question, can we actually heal the trauma, or is this a chronic lifelong illness? Or is it possible that it can be both? Or is it possible that we can look at it with curiosity instead of thinking we have the answer? And that's true science right there. True science is, let's explore the possibilities here. We have this hypothesis. Let's explore this and see what we discover. Unfortunately, I think the way a lot of people view science is trying to find the answers, when really true science is really wanting to live in the question and look at all the different possibilities. I look at a system like Kaiser, for example, And they are looking at preventative medicine more than ever. They're looking at the power of meditation and mindfulness. They're looking at the power of perspective and how that affects disease. They're not going to abandon all the great work they're doing in the physical or the mental room, for example. They're going to add to that, and then we're going to see what some other possibilities are. So I learned a long time ago, and it was a difficult path, I assure you, Saf. But I learned a long time ago that there's freedom in not knowing, and there is power in curiosity. And I look at something that we've accepted as the norm, and I just want to question that. What if there are other aspects to this? What if there are different possibilities? What if there are different approaches? And how can we integrate all of them? You know, I've worked in some really amazing treatment programs, and I've worked with some incredible neuroscientists, and we come at something from a seemingly very different place, but together we've created a holistic approach that will really help people. I'm going to read this then, what she's saying.
Yeah.
I ask because I still feel shut down in some areas after years of therapy, studying, and personal delving and work. Absolutely. Right. So again, it's like, you know, Saf said, there's not a finish line here. We don't finish it. We keep working. What I will say, though, is I think, and I want to be really clear, therapy is really incredible. And if I'm only doing talk therapy, and I'm learning about the patterns and I'm connecting the dots, that doesn't necessarily really get down to the root and change it. And to me, that is the talk therapy, the recognizing patterns, because a lot of that lives in the mental room, right? When we get down and learn how to be with our emotions, when we learn how to heal some of those underlying traumatic experiences, we can actually start to shift that in a really powerful way.
Thanks, TJ. I've got a few more messages on my other platform. Tanya says, spot on. Kimberly goes, I truly believe it's hereditary. It's passed down. It's in our genes. It's more than her comprehension. It's mind over matter. You have to take control, and you have to have like-minded people in your life. There is no cure or other than choices. And she meant to say passed down. Now, look, if you don't mind me asking, answer this very quickly, TJ, and of course, please add on what I'm going to say, because that's what we're about. It's all about adding in addition to. Look, we know that other factors can also raise your chances of addiction. Growing up with an alcoholic, being abused as a child, being exposed to extraordinary stress, all of these social factors can contribute to the risk of any kind of addiction, okay? And with drugs and underage drinking, the earlier you start, the greater the likelihood of having alcohol use disorder is likely, because that was my story. You know what I mean? It was around me. I did it for fear, whatever. Do I know if it was in my genes? Do I know if it was that? I don't know per se, because I don't know my birth parents. Do you hear a lot of stories where an alcoholic or an addict recognizes and their parents were, and their parents were, and their parents were? Yes. Are there alcoholics and addicts out there whose parents weren't? Yes. I don't think there's a definitive answer to that, really, TJ. I mean, yes, it may be. There may be some elements of it, but I really truly believe it's about the trauma, it's about the environment, it's about what's going on for you at that moment, and then how you take it with you later on sometimes.
Yeah, and that's been the $1 million question for a long time: nature or nurture, right? I think, Saf, you and I fall into the camp of it's most likely both, and for some it might be more one than the other, right? So I'm not going to, for example, say that I know that it's genetics. Absolutely. I'm going to say, I wonder if it's that and something else. I wonder if it's because, you know, we hear people say, well, I grew up with an alcoholic mother, and so therefore I know it's genetic. Well, I also grew up with the trauma of being with a parent that wasn't there for me because she was in her addiction or he was in his addiction.
Wow.
Right. So there's no way to pinpoint, oh, it must be genetic. What I want to really be careful about is to recognize, even though they're studying this now, they're not able to actually test. So when we look at certain what we call mental illness or personality disorders, we've passed along a story or a narrative that we have a chemical imbalance. Now, I know that they are studying that there are some chemical imbalances, but if we say to someone that's the one and only thing that's causing this, we might take away their ability to start to shift and move through this, because what we're hoping to do is give people as many possibilities for their own healing. And I think we need to be careful to say it's only genetic or it's a chemical imbalance, because then someone might go into, well, what's the use? I'm powerless over this and I just have to live with this. Now, that may be true. And we are, as we've already said, we're in an exciting place where we're starting to realize that we actually can change our genetics. Now, that is an exciting conversation, right? We can start to heal generational trauma. Trauma studies have shown, clinical studies looking at trauma have shown that we hold the trauma of multiple generations back. And as one person starts to heal, we can actually change the genetic makeup. Now, this is really exciting. Again, I'm not a scientist, but I read it and I listen to it because I look at how my expertise in emotional and spiritual can work with someone who has an expertise in the neuroscience and the physicality of it. And then how do we blend that and partner that? Not like you said, Seth, not in a competition like, oh no, I have the answer. Oh no, you have the answer. We look at that's the problem of the world right there, right? Everyone thinks we're supposed to have the answer. I really just want to be curious. Oh, I wonder if it is that. What does it create when we believe it's just that? What if it's that and this? What if it's that or this, right? So, it's quite possible that 10 people who have had addiction issues have 10 different causes for it, and a complex combination of different causes, right? So it could be genetics plus trauma. It could be growing up with attachment issues. There are so many layers to this conversation. And what's exciting is for us to be in this conversation to look at all the possibilities of how we can offer deeper healing. Because that's really the conversation I'm interested in, is how do we provide more opportunities for each of us to heal?
Whether it's a brain disease or not a brain disease, whether it's this or not that, let's approach it today. Let's see how we can get through this, how we can heal. You got a little compliment here, and I agree with you, Debbie, 100%. TJ is so articulate. Everyone, all my audience from London, from the UK, always speak so highly of you, TJ, because
thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Debbie. Do you know Debbie, by the way?
I do, yes.
Oh, hi, Debbie. Hi, Debbie. Thank you for that comment, and I couldn't agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more. It's a pleasure to have TJ, well, be with TJ in the show. Like this, my phone's blowing up, so unfortunately I can't put it on here. But Kimberly says, and the reals love heals.
Yes.
All do you have to have is unconditional love and compassion. Real love, healthy lifestyle, underdeveloped. Tanya says preventative medicine, correct? She says people need that. Holistic approaches and customized medicine techniques. Integrative approaches. I like this talk today. Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, and it's interesting. My friend Marianne Williamson, she was moving into the political sphere. She said, we don't have a healthcare system in the United States. We have a sick care system. And that's true looking back, right? We have, like, how do we treat all these symptoms? How do we get rid of these symptoms? How do we eradicate these symptoms? And looking back, that was the primary focus rather than looking at the deeper root causes, right? So, Michael Beckwith talks about it in this way. He said, if we're going to mandate anything, because we're looking at, even with COVID-19, right? We're looking at like, oh my gosh, we have this virus and this virus is killing people. And how do we stop the spread of the virus? Obviously, that's incredibly important. And we want to be curious about the underlying health issues that also make us more susceptible, right? And so very nuanced conversation, because we don't ever want to go into any blame for someone for where they're at in terms of their health. We want to offer possibilities. Right. So Beckwith says, if we could mandate exercise and healthy diet, we'd go a lot further than mandating, particular medicines to help treat something. Now, again, he's not saying there's anything wrong with that. It's like, in addition to that, let's look at true healthcare And I love, love, love the comment about love being a big part of the healing, because it's something we don't talk about a lot. So if it is genetic, if it is a brain disease, if it is from trauma, if it is from disconnection, if it's a combination of all of those things, what we recognize now is that the frequency of love actually helps heal all of that. And it's something for some people that sounds a little bit out there, but let's look at studying that. Let's look at what gets created when we have a relationship with ourselves that's, quite frankly, violent. I had a very violent relationship with myself. And what I mean by that is I had a constant inner critic that was telling me I didn't do something right. How can I keep doing this? What's wrong with me? And we're recognizing now that that has a profound impact on us in all four of those rooms. The more I have a narrative that I'm broken, the more brokenness shows up. What I'm not saying is the only way to heal something is through through emotions, or through loving ourselves. What I am saying is, let's look at that as another layer that can really help us heal. Because I do believe, and I think, Saf, you too, believe that we can heal these underlying root causes. I don't think there's a finish line, but we can continue to heal the underlying root causes. I absolutely know that to be true.
And I'm healing on a daily basis from my own experience. And I did come through the 12-step philosophy, and it was amazing for me. It was amazing for me. But the more I believed, or the more I bought into the fantasy that it is an illness, the more I believed it was an illness, and I blamed it on the illness. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Since developing and getting more involved in my own recovery, and reading and learning from remarkable people like yourself, and reading Gabor and everyone else, and Bruce Alexander, it's more than that for me now. We're not disregarding. I'm not saying there isn't an element of illness, and I'm not saying there's an element of it affecting your brain. Of course, it affects your brain,
right.
But if we can get past that, and if we can look at what we look at, the unresolved trauma, the deep root cause of the problem, if we can look at all these things, and work through these things, not relive them, but work through them, and try and get some kind of connection, try and get some kind of bonding, try and get, I mean, what is missing in someone's life to turn to drink and drugs in such an excessive way? That's the thing we need to be looking at.
Right.
Whether it's a brain disease or not a brain disease. I've got so many more questions here, TJ, so I'm going to run through them. Kimberly, don't be sorry. She goes, I'm sorry, I don't want to play the blame game. It's just that it's top behavior. It's not the same thing that we asked for. I think I know what you're saying. But please don't be sorry for anything, okay? Tanya says, yes, agreed. This is true. Even in the utero. Tanya says, TJ, yes, hands up. We need to change to prevention in our approach for health. Yes. Lol. Yes. Healthy diet, exercise. Look at the big picture. Love, frequency. Kimberly, thank you. And I agree with everything that you guys are saying. Kimberly, please, don't say sorry about anything. We're here to work through things together, and you're doing great as well. And we like to help you through this process as well. So yeah. So is it a brain disease? Is it not a brain disease? I don't think it's even about that. We're talking about it. I mean, we know, especially in the UK, why people want to, again, be sold that fantasy that it is only a brain disease model for insurance purposes, for getting payment for treatment, for getting, because that's, we have got a lot of government funding in the UK. And if they can prove, or if they can emphasize that it is a brain disease model, there's more chance of getting money into the services, which I'm fine with, because the more money that comes into services, the chances are there's more help out there. The more help that's out there, the chance that there's more people into recovery and can have a long-lasting recovery, which is fine. And I can understand that point of view, and I can understand to get the insurance paid out and all that. I can understand all of that. But what we're coming from is that, yes, it might be, it might not be, but if we can work through it, whatever it is, whether it's brain disease or not brain disease, whether it's hereditary or not hereditary, whether it's the environment or not the environment, if we can work through the root cause, that's what it's about, isn't it? It all comes down to the root cause, right?
Yeah, and one of one of my favorite frameworks is just a very simple question, and that is, what is the valuable question? I got this many, many years ago in a workshop with Maria Nemeth, and she just simply asked, "What's the valuable question?" And the valuable question for me in everything we're talking about is, how do we heal? Right. And so we end up sometimes, well, I'll put it in the I end up sometimes living in my mind of trying to figure it out. Right. Is it this or is it that? And what gets created when it's this or that? And maybe we debate whether it's this or that, and then I have my perspective, which is the spiritual approach. And I can end up, thinking that I have the answer. But the valuable question to me is, how can we help people heal? How can I help myself heal? And so if I remove any possibility, then I also remove a possibility for healing. So in my own journey, if I were to say, well, oh, it's not a brain disease, then I would limit myself. I would limit all the wisdom that is emerging in that paradigm. And it's important, right? So when I say, oh yeah, let's be curious about that. Let's be curious about genetics. Let's be curious about environment. Let's be curious about all the different aspects, because the valuable question is, how do we all come together and heal? We're in a moment in the history of the world where we are in a profound, there's a lot of addiction. There are a lot of people dying from addiction. And so if we get lost in the debate, we lose the opportunity that really the valuable question, how do we all come together with all of our expertise, with all of our life experience, and share different ideas so that we can actually start to come together and help people heal. With COVID-19 and with shelter in place, whatever you feel or think about any of that, we know that the effect of that is going to be a lot of people needing help with their mental health, with addiction, helping people move into recovery. The next few years, we're going to see a lot of that. So this conversation is going to be more important than ever.
And we'll be repeating this show in all our shows on a regular basis. Of course, you got YouTube as well. Hi, Kelly. Welcome to the show. It's been a while. She says, hello, beautiful souls. Hello, Kelly Byrne. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure to have you with us. So, are you going to sit on the fence, TJ? Yes or no? I know we said that we'll look at everything. I'm sort of putting you on the spot here. I know you said we'll look at everything. Is it an illness or not?
The power, the power for me is in this very, very simple answer. I don't know. Right? Because as soon as I think I know, then I limit the possibilities. So what I will say about that is my approach and my perspective and the rooms I live in are in the emotional and spiritual. Because as I've said before, you don't want me to be your medical doctor, I assure you, because that's not my background. That's not my calling. That's not my education. But what I will say is, let's all come together, right? So what I can offer is, rather than saying, is it a disease or not, I can say, whether it's a disease or not, let's look at how we can heal. And I bring what can be healed spiritually and emotionally, and someone else can bring what is healed. In other words, okay, let me put it this way, Saf. I believe very strongly in the power of spiritual practice. I believe very strongly in the power of mindfulness and meditation. But if I'm in a car accident, I'm not going to call my meditation teacher. I'm going to call a paramedic, right? Because I'm bleeding. So it wouldn't make sense for me to say, oh, no, I don't need a paramedic. I'm just going to meditate right now. Because see, that's the mind. It's this or that. But let's put it this way. If I'm in an accident, the paramedic comes. We stop the bleeding. We work with the physical first. Once I've stabilized, then I'm going to start being curious. Oh, I wonder if mindfulness, meditation, the energy of particular frequencies of thought, I wonder if this can help my healing. And we know now, we know that science knows now that it is part of the acceleration of the healing. So even if someone says, oh, I know for sure it is a brain disease. Okay, great. So we recognize now that all the different aspects of life, including the spiritual and the emotional, have a profound impact on the healing of that. And then we can move out of debating that, and then we can share ideas and come together. And, you know, I'm repeating myself, but I do think it's important. The valuable question is, how do we come together and help people heal, rather than it's this or it's that, and I have the answer and you don't. And, you know, I just am so grateful that for the most part, I have resigned from the debating society. Now, my ego mind still wants to do it sometimes. I'm like, oh, isn't that interesting? I think I know something.
Now, is that sitting on the fence, ladies and gentlemen? I don't know. But you know what? I don't know. It's probably the best answer anyone can give, really. Because we don't know, do we? We don't really. We know it affects the brain, but does that make it an illness? We know that if we work, I mean, look at myself. Let's look at myself, yeah? I've worked through my recovery. And I'm still working through it. I'm working through underlying issues, deep root causes, working through the trauma that I experienced, recognizing how it all started. And guys, if you want to know more about it as well, I thought it's a good chance to say that my book is out. Yeah, it's called Out of the Madness, A Message of Hope. If you go onto my website, www.safbuxy.com, press books, and the two links are there for America and for the UK. It's I know I wrote the book, but I hope you'll find value from it, because it's a very, it's a lovely book, even though I say so myself, and I think it's my story and it's how I got out of it, and it's where I am today. So please go on then. If you do like what you read, please send a little review as well. It'd be great to hear what your thoughts are, and 10% of it goes to Healing for the Nations charity. And we may even put a bit of money in for research for conscious recovery. I don't know what that is. I'm even spoken to TJ about that. But yeah, so guys, yeah, please read that book. But if you look at my story, there is a way out. Yeah, whether it's an illness or not, whether it's in my brain or not, whether I can have another drink or not again, I don't even know about that, because the fact that do I want another drink or drug? No, I don't want it. If I have one, will I be back to that same level again? I don't know the answer. The people who are back to that same level again haven't obviously worked through it the way they maybe could have worked through it. I don't know the answer. And I think when you say I don't know whether it's a brain disease or not a brain disease, that's the best answer we can give, because we actually don't know. We know it affects the brain.
Right.
But what doesn't affect the brain?
Yeah. And I was, as you were speaking, I was thinking, if we didn't try new approaches, or we didn't question things, or we didn't live in the possibilities, we'd still be living in caves, rubbing two sticks together to make fire, right? So humans evolve, consciousness evolves, we explore different possibilities. I love what the Course in Miracles says, and it's all I know is not all there is to know. And look at that as a possibility of expansion. What if I'm open to all these different ideas? And that, to me, is how we evolve and grow. And, I think it'll be interesting. We probably won't be here 100 years from now in the physical form. We might be back in a physical form, but it'll be interesting to see the evolution of this, because, there are rapid changes happening. And I think it's very exciting.
Me too. Guys, this time always flies by, so we've come to an end. Thanks, TJ, as always. Well, I enjoyed that today. It was someone said something. I don't know comes from a place of humility, not sitting on the fence. Beautiful. Thank you. Thanks, Beth. I think you're right. I think she's a fan of yours now, TJ. But yeah, I think you're right.
The road to some degree of humility has been a painful one for me.
Exactly. And TJ will never admit that he's a humble man, because once he does do it, now the humility sort of goes out the window, doesn't it? But guys, thank you very much for watching another episode of Universal Recovery. Thank you, TJ, as always. The eloquence and the knowledge that you bring to our show is just remarkable, and it shows in the comments. So thank you as always, guys. Thank you for another week. Please check out my book. You're gonna love it. I promise you're gonna love it. I've got a signed copy for TJ. And if you want a signed copy, just ask me. But yeah, Out of the Madness, A Message of Hope. Go to my website, safbuxy.com. You can get it from there. I've got a fantastic guest this Thursday. I don't know if you know. Do you know a Don Lynch by any chance?
No.
TJ? He's an amazing man, Don Lynch. He's got some amazing powers. So it's worth tuning in on Thursday, 8 p.m. UK time. TJ, thank you very much, as
Thank you,
always.
Saf, and thank you, everyone. See you next week.
Thank you, guys. We will all see you next week. God bless. And brain disease model or not a brain disease model, it doesn't matter. Let's work with it and let's heal together. Bless.